Before we get started, I am Chloé, here Quinonero, in charge of the eMag for climate change. This is an organization that was founded in 2015 in order to federate all the stakeholders, companies, civil society, main stakeholders, to federate local actors through international events like summits in Europe and in Africa, to analyze and to publish and to display our various data. On our website, you can find a map and some data. We also have actions outside of the summit. Monthly, we have a platform for exchanging and discussing. This monthly meeting is very important, especially this year before we get the final results. Also, this eMag is also supported by the Observatory, and we also have a magazine which will be available in a PDF format, which you will find on our website. So you can look at the schedule for 23. We will have different topics here. We're starting this day with biodiversity and climate. In February, we will have access to renewable energy. Then we will have talk about agroecology and food systems. In April, we will talk about financing losses and damages, then mobility and sustainable transport. In June, we'll look at circular economy and waste management. And in July, we will be talking about sustainable habitats. For more information on those programs, we invite you to consult the link here. Now, on our agenda today, we will have Mélaine, Assè, Wassa. She's in charge of the, he's in charge, sorry, of the biodiversity. He's in charge of climate change. And we will see how to adapt ecosystems to climate challenges. Then Raimat, climate change, she will talk about the international coalition in Africa, which was launched at the COP15, and then she will moderate the discussion around the issue of what lever can be used in order to converge climate and biodiversity. We will also have Amy Fraenkel, she's the Executive Secretary for Migratory Species. Amy, she will talk about the corridors of biodiversity as a tool for the conservation of species. Then we will have Adja, who is the coordinator of the Observatory in West Africa. Thank you for being here with us, Adja. She will also talk about the importance of ecology and the role of communities to converge biodiversity, desertification, and climate. And then Yohann will be our last speaker. He's an expert, and he will talk about the various mechanisms for accessing finances and building skills and competencies in West Africa. The last 15 minutes of our eMag will be dedicated to a time of Q&A. There will be no translation then, but do not hesitate to leave questions in the mag, to introduce yourself via the chat box, and leave your name and the name of your organization. Thank you all for your presence. Thank you in advance to our speakers and to our interpreter. I will now give the floor to Mélaine of Climate Change to make the presentation of our topic today, which you will find again also on the link in our chat. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Please allow me to share my screen, then I will introduce myself. Can you see my screen, everyone? Yeah, getting there. So hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Mélaine. I'm in charge of project manager at Climate Change. I'm also in charge of the former observatory, but for the last 6 months now, we're talking about the new observatory, which is the Observatory of Climate Action in Africa, one of the tools of climate change for non-state actors in Africa. For this first eMag, I will introduce a trend but I chose to focus on a particular axis, which is ecological connectivity in Africa as an important tool for adaptation to climate changes in Africa. It has to be said that this eMag and this presentation is part of the activities which have been initiated by climate change for some time now around these same topics. One of our latest activities took place during the Dakar summit last October, when we had a full day dedicated to ecological connectivity with Raimat, who is here today. Following these workshops, we did the sectoral assessment analysis, and we were able to gather the various trends, and this will be part of the presentation. Just quickly, there will be 2 points here. Firstly, a definition and a presentation of what is ecological connectivity, what we mean by that, what is this concept all about, and then we will talk about biodiversity corridors as tools, collaborative tools, in order to reinforce and strengthen ecological connectivity and adaptation to climate change in Africa. It's important also to underline that in this presentation, there will be also a number of points that will be mentioned quickly, just to give more time to all of our speakers and to come back to these points. First of all, historically speaking, nature is interconnected. All the elements in nature are interconnected, which is giving a beneficial balance for biodiversity and climate. With the development of human activities, mainly mine, forests, etc., we're having more and more a reduction of that interconnection between natural spaces. Now we have dams, for example, that could limit the interconnection of species. We also have railways which are built, which also reduce migration of certain species. For example, we were given a recent example in Dakar, giraffes, which at one point were not able to migrate from one natural space to another because of the railway that were stopping their movements. So we've come to realize that the balance, that this interconnection that used to be there initially has gone down and actually led to some fragmentation of the various natural habitats. And this situation is leading to some imbalance when it comes to biodiversity and climate. So what could be done? Some measures were taken in order to protect these species, except those former models were looking at the various natural habitats in separate ways. So there were like models, or one model for humid areas, for arid areas, without having a global overview or a global model, which led to some results that were not as good as expected, and little results really, because the conditions were not there, which is why we now are talking about ecological connectivity. Since the 90s till now, we've been talking more and more about ecological connectivity. We understand this concept as a paradigm, as a solution to the issue of fragmentation and the lack and the loss of biodiversity. For some years now, we've had several projects that have been implemented on the way that this ecological connectivity should go in order to make up for some of the losses and damages. What is ecological connectivity? One of the first definitions that we have is that it defines a degree of connections between various natural spaces within a same landscape, depending on their making and their distribution and ecological functions, in order to make a connection between various natural areas. So this is a new paradigm which has been implemented now for the last 20 or 30 years. And this is a way to reconnect those various natural spaces which were at one point separated. One of the tools that makes this connectivity easier are what we call the biodiversity corridors, as part of the Biodiversity Convention and also as part of partnerships with UCN. We have more and more projects which are highlighting these corridors of biodiversity. And this is a natural space or geographical space rather that is clearly defined in order to maintain a connection between various natural species or habitats. Practically speaking, this is two practical points or connections between species, enabling birds, for example, to migrate from one place to another. Before, you had ways, road that would cut a natural space, but with the new corridors that have been implemented, there is a new reconnection. There are bridges that are made for the birds to be able to change areas according to the seasons, it is their migration, as was the case way before all those changes came by climate changes that we know of came. Now, just to give you an example of a corridor of biodiversity, I think Anne will talk about this more, but we do have a project in which climate change is very much involved, which is the corridor of biodiversity, and we'll talk about this in a moment. But typically, this is an example of a corridor where we have a number of stakeholders who are gathered to work together to enable the freedom of the species, animals and birds and biodiversity. So today, we realize that these tools enable us to not only reinforce ecological connectivity, but also facilitate adaptation to climate change. First of all, in the governance, because of these corridors, there are a number of stakeholders are involved, both in the management of the conservation areas, but also in the planning policies for protecting biodiversity, and also adaptation policies to climate change. Another example, for example, are the conservation areas for the in several countries, Angola, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and another country, several countries where we have the local communities involved, and also local authorities are also involved in managing these spaces, but also NGOs, be it in financial involvement in order to help protect areas of biodiversity. Another example, which is more known in the rich region in Central Africa, with 5 countries involved: Burundi, Rwanda, RDC, Uganda, and Tanzania, with local communities being involved. So this shows really a change in the paradigm in order to do, and the way that we are now protecting biodiversities and protecting these areas. Before, local communities were not involved, and that led sometimes to some land issues and also other issues relating to the protection of threatened species. Just to conclude quickly, we are questioning the role now of connectivity in the role of the convergence of the three agendas. Often we present biodiversity, climate change, and desertification as non-connected conventions. But in truth, these 3 are not disconnected, and I would present them as a triple convention because they come from the same root, and historically they are connected. So the question of ecological connectivity is really at the heart of the three conventions, in that it is enabling the protection of biodiversity and also to fight against climate change, because those corridors, for example, enable natural species and animal species to change regions depending on the climate threats, and in order to escape weather hazards and to better grow and develop. Now, regarding desertification, it's also the same, because having this new ecological connectivity, we are able to recover some form of biodiversity that is slowing down desertification. So it's important to really focus on this new paradigm and to take interest in all of these projects in Africa, because this is requiring the participation of all the stakeholders. Thank you, Mélaine. Before we move on to a panel with the speakers that we have today, we have 1 minute for one question. I did not see one in the chat, but if there was a question. Yes, someone says we could also talk about the conventions on migratory species. We will talk about this, yes, indeed, later on.
So, as it is, so that we can start putting some actions into what we will do. Of course, what I do know is that there are, we want to build the capacity of youth to be able to aggregate plastics. We can do that. And then in addition, the other needs, because some of them don't see it, some see it as business, others don't see it as business. So we want them to see the business angle to the whole thing, so that they can.
Ça a été un peu coupé, je n'ai pas très bien saisi la question.
You get what I'm...
We did not quite hear the question, sorry.
Talking about is the GHG emission aspect. How we can look at that youth capacity.
Est-ce que vous pouvez poser votre question plus précisément, s'il vous plaît?
Could it be, could your question be a bit more specific? We're having difficulty understanding your question.
I remember my colleagues back then were saying that the cost is much, because the people here will be looking at the dollar or euro exchange rate, which has not been friendly to so many people here. So I don't know how we can reduce the cost through this support with a business partnership, and then see how we are able to.
Je pense qu'on va essayer de répondre à vos questions par écrit.
Okay, we are going to answer your question in writing. Okay, maybe our next speakers will be able to answer your question. Okay, please come back to us later on if you can now. Okay, we will stop then. Thank you. Thank you for your question. We will stop for now.
Thank you very much, Eugene. Maybe you could ask your question directly in the chat, because the connection is not very good, so we can't hear you. Oui, et d'une façon générale, peut-être je suggère que vous posiez vos questions par écrit.
And generally speaking, I would say that you should write your questions in the chat box, please, if possible. Thank you.
Bon, ben merci beaucoup du coup.
Thank you.
Attendez,
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for this introduction, Mélaine. Thank you, Chloé, for your introduction. So I'm Raimat. I'm the director for biodiversity at Climate Change. I have this responsibility of being the moderator for this panel, which I will try to do. Just 2 words to come back to what Mélaine was saying. As we can see, is that ecological connectivity corridors of biodiversity are beautiful tools to make the connection, to make the convergence between climate issues, biodiversity, and desertification, a conversion that is talked about a lot, but that we are not managing to do so well. And it seems to us at Climate Change that this is a cross-cutting topic to make the connection between these various topics. So that is why during the COP15 in Montreal, Climate Change and their partners and its partners launched an international coalition regarding corridors of biodiversity in Africa. So this coalition was launched at COP15 and will continue in 2023. It was co-chaired by France, Gabon, Guinea, and Tanzania, and so far has included about 50 or 60 members, either members who are participating financially, supporting the coalition, or members who are still observant and who are still in observation, and we hope that they'll be able to join us shortly. Just to say that this is a topic that seems to us sufficiently important to be tackled through the prism of international coalition. I would say also that we have a demonstration project. Mélaine mentioned this earlier on. So this is a demonstration project that will run from February 23 to February 26 over 3 years. And this project will try to restore, to maintain, to create a corridor from the north to the south of the country with the support of finances from the compensation sector. If you are interested in this project, maybe we could talk about this later on. So without further ado, I want to give the floor now to our various representatives of this panel. We will start with Amy Fraenkel. Amy, you are the General Secretary. Let me say exactly so I don't make a mistake. You are, let me see, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. I know, Amy, so because we talked about this before, that you are a defensor of ecological connectivity. So I would like to ask you, do you consider that this ecological connectivity is sufficiently taken into account today? How can we improve its efficacy? And how can we make it a real tool to serve adaptation and to serve climate change? You have the floor. Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yes, we can hear you. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. Yes, we can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Attendez. Voilà. Okay. Donc, je suis très heureux.
So I'm very happy to be here with you today to talk about this very important and very current topic. I will now switch to English.
So yes, the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, or CMS as it's known, has been involved with this issue of connectivity for a very long time. This is because ecological connectivity is essential for migratory species. First, migratory species rely on a network of specific types of sites and habitats throughout their lives as part of their annual movements. Second, migratory species must be able to reach those sites, which can be located across many human-made hazards and barriers, as well as across national boundaries, and in some cases, even continents. Thus, it's critical to identify key habitat, to apply appropriate measures to protect or conserve such habitat, and to address the main threats to connectivity. So those are some of the areas that we are focused on. But connectivity is definitely not just related to species. Connectivity conservation is key for the health and functioning of ecosystems, for genetic diversity, for restoration, and for climate resilience, and as well as addressing ecosystem restoration more broadly. Now, turning to climate change, as we know, is already causing changes to biodiversity, including migratory species. This can impact key habitat, availability of water and prey, and also have phenological changes, which are changes related to the timing of migration events. And that can lead to mismatches between the needs of species and the conditions that are at the various places along migratory pathways. In fact, we are just launching a study, literally right now, with support from the UK government on the impacts of climate change on migratory species, which will be released later this year and which will definitely address this issue of connectivity as part of its work. The fact is that protecting, restoring, and increasing connectivity, which are already important for migratory species, will be even more important as the impacts of climate change advance. In fact, designing ecological networks and corridors, removing barriers to dispersal, and restoring natural resources within these areas are the measures most frequently recommended in the scientific literature as a climate change adaptation strategy for biodiversity management. Now, the good news is that there is now wide agreement globally on the importance of ecological connectivity for biodiversity, for climate change, for restoration, and for other key global priorities. For instance, connectivity is included in several goals and targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that was adopted last year in Montreal. For example, it's in Target 2 on restoration. It's also in Target 3, which is the so-called 30 by 30 target. Now, importantly, connectivity can provide a realistic and pragmatic way to achieve the 30 by 30 target, because it's not just focused on pristine protected areas, but on all kinds of areas that might have some function for nature. So by connecting important areas through a mix of conserved areas, the 30 by 30 target makes more sense for the reality of multiple use landscapes and the people that live in those landscapes. So we don't want to see islands of biodiversity. This is the approach of the past. As I mentioned, connectivity has also been reflected in the outcomes of the UNCCD, for example, at their COP last year, and was very strongly mentioned in the IPCC report issued just last year. So that's the good news. But the fact is, how well we achieve those objectives comes down to implementation. If you look at Target 3, connectivity is captured in just 2 words: well connected. Those are the same words that were in IT Target 11, under which connectivity failed to be successfully addressed. So in order to succeed, my view is that connectivity has to be a kind of litmus test for all area-based conservation measures that are taken at the national level. So it's the choice of which areas to protect and conserve needs to be guided in part by whether they contribute to connectivity. Of course, along with other key considerations, such as the needs and impacts on people who live in those areas. Likewise, urban growth, which is going to be exploding in many parts of the world over the next decades. Infrastructure development, also with huge growth trends, and other human activities need to be planned in ways that achieve social and economic needs while preserving connectivity. Another key element, of course, is the international aspect, which is to achieve ecological connectivity in an international world, governments and stakeholders need to cooperate across national boundaries to protect and conserve shared natural areas and species. And this is, at the heart of what CMS does. Now, at CMS, we are working to build on the past and on these new opportunities to ensure that connectivity is actually implemented on the ground. Just a couple of examples. We've been involved in a variety of settings, including there's an initiative in Africa we've been doing related to trans-frontier conservation cooperation. Another example is our work in Central Asia, where we work with all countries in the region to address the needs of both the wild animals that are protected under CMS and the people across large landscapes. We are also part of a partnership known as Wildlife Connect with WWF International, the IUCN Specialist Group on Connectivity, and the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, working right now in 4 areas of the world on these issues. This topic of connectivity will also be a major focus at our upcoming COP14, which will be held this October in Uzbekistan, and you're all warmly invited to join us there. So I do believe, as Anne said, I'm a real believer in this issue. I think this is the right issue at the right moment. We're at a crossroads in our development choices and in our need to address the trends of biodiversity loss. This makes sense. Ecological connectivity, it makes sense, not only, as I said, for migratory species, but addressing the way that natural systems need to be functioning and what we need to do to help them function. We are finally delighted to engage with this important initiative on corridors in Africa and really look forward to strengthening our collaboration with Climate Chance and the other partners. So thank you so much for inviting us to be here, and back over to you. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Amy, pour
yes, thank you, Amy, for your presentation. Indeed, you mentioned that ecological connectivity is very much present now in the framework that was established during or drafted during the COP15. The question is whether or not it is sufficient, and we could talk about that. Yes, maybe we could have a bit more figures or more details, and it will happen. We are here to do some and also I hear from you that connectivity is one of the keys for successes, and also to solve conflicts between animals and human beings in the corridors. There's human activity, and we have to do with this. So tackling this topic is also tackling the issue of cohabitation and conflict. I will now give the floor Adja, Aïssatou. We know each other. You are the coordinator of the Observatory for Protected Species in West Africa. We met during our last Climate Change Summit in Dakar in October. And we thought it was interesting to hear you again regarding this issue of the factors or drivers for success for the protected species, and especially the role of the local communities in this networking and in the success of ecological connectivity. So you have the floor. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, and hello, everyone. It's a great joy to meet you or e-meet you again and see you all, and to see all the climate change team. Chloé, would you mind sharing the map with us, please? As I was saying, and as Amy was just saying, what's important here is to be able to make sure that the connectivity or the functionality of the ecosystems are maintained. You introduced me as a coordinator of the Observatory for Biodiversity and Protected Areas. I think it is good to also recall that this is still a project that is financed by the EU and implemented by Assè as part of the program, which is also an initiative. So we have 5 observatories that are under development at a global level. Also, OBAPAO is the latest one, has been there for 2 years. So I'm the coordinator on behalf of the consortium with 4 institutions. Maybe I can just share that quickly with you, and then I will come to the core of our topic. The CSE, the monitoring committee in Dakar, also on behalf of the network for marine protected areas, Ghana University, and also regional center. So this observatory aims at contributing to improving the production of data, quality data for the sub-region, and this production of data aims at helping decision makers, be it local or sub-regional, in the decisions and the implementations regarding protected areas. So I will not come back to this in details. I'm going to share now a number of points on what we are doing, but please allow me first to present this map to you, which is part of what we have been doing. And in green, you see the protected areas as defined by the UCM. And we don't see any connection between those regions which are fragmented. You see the development of cities, water networks, railway networks are not materialized, but these networks and also the facilities, human facilities, actually contribute to the fragmentation of these protected areas. So at the observatory, we want to support countries in order to improve the management of the protected areas, and that would imply the ecological connectivity. Why? Amy mentioned it. We want to have a coherent, dynamic ecosystem that would be resilient, where communities would be able to solve their issues or meet their needs while including fauna. Now, for the needs of development, we have a fragmentation, really, of the ecosystems, if you like, due to non-adapted policies. I will not come back to this now. But it has to be said that in the various reports on biodiversity, it was mentioned that we are noticing a lack or loss of biodiversity, where populations of fauna have collapsed. So there is a strong decline in West Africa between the 19th or 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. So this fragmentation is highly connected, or the collapse rather, is connected to this fragmentation, but also over-exploitation and pressure, climate change. We'll come back to that. All this has an impact on biodiversity. So this is the conclusions. We do have a few places of biodiversities around communities. Often communities have needs, but they don't have access, and they are in conflicts with those spaces that we call the protected area. So what should we do? UCM and our international commitments are calling for other alternatives, such as, for example, measures of conservation that could be ways to manage those corridors. But all in all, it would have to start from a global planning at a regional level. I've just come out of a meeting with another sub-regional project relating to protected areas, and these institutions, they have regional programs They are here to support the conservation of biodiversity, but they have to be guided when it comes to decisions to make. So it would be really relevant and helpful to have, first of all, an assessment. What is the state of the corridors, first of all? What is really important in which area? That's for regional. Let's at the regional level. What about the national level? What are the policies that need to be implemented for the corridors to be fully integrated in the legal framework, to have actual legal actions in order to institutionalize these corridors? So I think these are the kind of measures that need to be identified. We need to have a legal framework to these corridors, but it should not be from up down, but down up, bottom up. We need to talk with the local communities. What is the contribution of the communities? I think they are really at the beginning and at the end of all these processes. First of all, at the assessment stage, the local communities know their territory. They have already lived together with the fauna in a harmonious way, so they need to take stock of all the traditional actions which have been used before. So this assessment will require planning, and we need to put this in a global context. And as technicians, we've always asked for this, and we need to have a synergy between the various conventions, be it the Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biodiversity, the Convention on Fighting Against Desertification. All of these conventions are there to reduce the impact of these ecosystems for resilience, but also for the resilience of the communities living in these areas. So this full integration will have to be participatory. Adja, you have just 1 minute left. So once we have identified these areas as a priority, we will need to implement in action plans, taking into account all the challenges, but also in the implementation, we will need to make sure that the actions are concrete enough and are documented and are monitored with clear indicators in order to document the successes, but also the failures of such actions that will contribute to the improvement of all the devices and all the schemes that we are implemented. Thank you, Adja, for this great presentation, so fascinating as usual. And what matters really to you in order to have success is to put all the stakeholders around the table without forgetting anyone, from the national level to the local level, actually even more local, all the way down to the local communities, and make them actors of their policies for conservation. So thank you very much for your presentation. Everything that we've said so far is nothing really without some fundings and some framework. As usual, we always come back to the same. So now we'll give the floor to Yohann, who is a member of the Regional Center of Collaboration. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, we met yesterday, actually, in another meeting. I know that this issue of the convergence of the three conventions is close to you, and you are trying to translate this into various projects and in the various frameworks which you are drafting. So could you tell us a bit more about this? Thank you very much, Anne, and hello, everyone. I'm Mr. Yohann ZABA. I'm an expert at the Collaboration Center, Global Center for the UN Secretary for Climate Change. This is a partnership which was implemented with the BOAD, which is the financial company from the UNFCCC. More precisely, I'm in charge of the implementation of Article 6 in the various countries and access to carbon market. And so indeed, there are some important elements here. Coming back just to one thing that was said by Mélaine at the beginning of this session, that talked about the fact that the three conventions are often regarded as separate, and these silos are often connected to financial issues, to know which budget goes to which portfolio, but we have realized that our actions are often accumulated with common actions on the field. So our center, covering 26 countries from French-speaking countries in West Africa and the ECOWAS area. So we have talked to these people to try to activate a convergence between those three conventions with ongoing projects, but also projects which will continue to be developed in the future with various fundings. So far, we have developed a network of various stakeholders with climate change, but also with other structures and finance climate. So this is an alliance that is grouping a number of states in the region. And the aim is to promote everything that has to do with capacity building of the various states, and also the access to data regarding environment, the biodiversity, climate. We also work with others, which another institution which is becoming more and more a reference institution when it comes to identifying areas in the ECOWAS region. And we are trying to support project managers. We are here to support also states, of course. This is part of my job, and we are also here to support civil society stakeholders, stakeholders from the private sector in looking for funds and in putting some structures to the projects, and also in accessing data and information through capacity building and the availability of databases and various other tools. So what's interesting here for stakeholders from the civil society is that we are not really a financial office. We are not there to give money directly to the various structures in the private sector or to the civil society, but we are called to having access to various stakeholders, various data, with whom we have some economic and political weight, and with whom we can identify the various projects or project managers. So we are more like a hub, if you like, to facilitate access to the various front offices, to guide all the various project managers to the right places. So we also support them in the structuring of the project. And as we said, we have a willingness to really increase and strengthen the convergence between the conventions, making sure that the three dimensions of biodiversity, climate change, and the other one will be taken into account. To conclude, these are three very impactful elements in West Africa, which I take this opportunity also to talk about the gender issue the three dimensions strongly impact women who, in this crisis, are first of all the victims of these migrations because they are more vulnerable. They are also submitted to, or subject rather, to climate change and to the economic hazards. So in this sense, the gender issue, among others, is a way to make a connection between the three conventions and to make sure that in the coming projects, in the activities that we're carrying out, to make sure that we always keep an eye on this, to walk hand in hand with all the stakeholders, so that to make sure everyone is fully aware of all the stakes, and the gender issue, of course, being one, and to make sure that the stakeholders be able to reach the various facilities. A bank, the bank which is connected to the green fund. We can also submit projects to various institutions. We can co-finance some projects which are in the UMOA region covering 8 countries, but they can also play the role of an accredited entity to support some projects. Our experience shows that this is often complicated and that often the projects are rather small size which is why we are launching a campaign in order to lead a smaller project to more local scales so that they could have more specific and more targeted access to finances. There will be different hubs or different areas, but whatever the activity, whatever the specificity of the project, we want to encourage mixity and the various topics within the projects. That's what we can say at this time. I will communicate to the people there, the address in Lomé, so you can send your questions, let us know about your needs, and we'll make sure that we can prepare whatever we have to support you in the region. Thank you very much, Yohann. Thank you for giving us your information as well. Often project managers have to know where to go, which door to knock on. And if you could help us with that, that would be great. That would be a great asset. We are coming now to the end of our panel discussion. We have a little bit of time left for questions now in order to interact with our panelists. Let me see. I'm reading the questions. Maybe we could take a first question from the chat, which I think may be addressed to you, Yohann, regarding the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And so the question is, how does this Article 6 contribute to the strengthening of the ecological connectivity? This is a tricky question. Article 6 is not completely over. We're still working on it. There are many negotiations that are still underway. Before June, all I can say is that it could be reshuffled after negotiation. So we need to keep in mind the concept of the principle of Article 6. The principle is that all countries should have the willingness and the desire to work to the improvement of the environment. This principle implies that we should address all the sectors in the world, be it the industry sector, energy sector, environmental sectors, biodiversity, desertification, and adaptation to climate change. So as such, the spirit behind Article 6 is connected to the fact that all actions should converge towards an improvement of the environment at a global scale. So I won't be able to give you specific articles talking about convergence. It's more of a philosophy, if you like, and more of a willingness to use all the tools available. We talked about ecosystems that are fragmented, be it through human actions or through natural climate actions. And it is the same. We are trying to reconnect these three conventions so that whenever we carry an action, we tackle the action at every level. So it's a principle that will be included in Article 6, and I would encourage you to and invite you to a session, the training session. Those who will write to me, I will simply tell them about this training that will take place soon. If I have the link, maybe I can send it to you now. But if you want to have a more in-depth session, you are most welcome. This is hard to do in 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Yohann. More questions around the issues of means and how to implement the ecological connectivity, maybe for Adja or for Amy. How can we make sure that the corridors are maintained? Are the corridors, ecological corridors, also a way to fight against deforestation? Someone from RDC is asking this question. Amy, Adja, would you like to answer the question, maybe?
I'd be happy to answer. So I think I was listening carefully, and I really appreciate the presentations from the others in the panel, and the many questions and comments in the chat. The first thing I would say is, to achieve this, it's going to take action of different kinds. And the question is, of course, part of the answer to the question is about technical knowledge, and there is a body of work that's been done. In fact, some of the partnerships I mentioned already, have developed expertise in terms of what does it mean to actually get down on the ground and do the mapping and do the work, the consultations, the biological work that is needed to actually develop, an appropriate corridor. And it will be different in pretty much every situation. So it's very tailored to the place. This is the first thing. So there is technical information, and that's great. There's the IUCN has a group, it's over 800 experts globally, a specialist group on connectivity, and we've been working with them. They actually have put out guidelines. So that exists. And we have a website that tried to already pool some of the resources on connectivity. If you come onto our CMS website, and I think one of my colleagues has posted it in the chat. It's still a work in progress, but there's some information there. But then, it also is about implementation inside the CBD implementation. So what happens with this new global biodiversity framework, as I mentioned, is countries have to implement it and set their own goals nationally. And if they approach it the way they did with the Aichi targets, we know it won't achieve the connectivity aspect that we've been talking about. So we really need to see a different approach in terms of the commitments, what countries do at the national level in their NBSAPs, to use the CBD word for the national plans, to implement it and make sure that connectivity is a priority. So it's not the key point, the takeaway point for me to leave with you is connectivity is not about looking at existing protected areas and just drawing a line between them. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about looking at functionality. What are the most important places that we need to be looking at? They might need to be restored too. I mean, so we need to look at historical areas of importance. Where are there animals? Where are there people? What are the river systems? What matters for ensuring a healthy ecosystem, which is obviously important, not just for, again, migratory species, but for landscape, for farming, for local people, so it's one of these multiple benefit situation, but it has to get inside those discussions. And finally, at the highest level, it needs to get into, I think, highest levels of politics and consciousness of decision makers saying, look, we do need roads, we do need infrastructure, but we need to do this in a smart way. Let's look at where can we put those wind farms and minimize impacts on species, but maximize the impacts of the energy that we need. So it's planification, it's smart thinking, it's political, and it's technical, all of those things. And of course, yes, and we need money to make it work. Thank you.
Adja, vous vouliez réagir?
Merci Anne. Je ne vais pas peut-être aborder ce que Amy vient de dire, la nécessité de documenter l'évaluation qu'il y a autour. Quels sont les anciens corridors naturels qui existaient, comment ça fonctionnait, et faire des études à la limite socio-anthropologiques autour de ces corridors-là. Ça commence par ça, la cartographie des acteurs, mais aussi d'identifier les actions à mener. Est-ce que ce corridor-là, en le balisant, en mettant des mesures de gestion, ça suffit, ou en érigeant en aire protégée, suivant une catégorie qui convient par rapport aux besoins des communautés? Donc, c'est cas au cas par cas. Ce qu'il faut rappeler, c'est que la connectivité, quelle est l'importance de la connectivité? Ça permet de rendre fonctionnelles les aires protégées, que ce soit aires protégées ou autres mesures, que ce soit au niveau terrestre, mais aussi au niveau marin. Souvent, les gens l'oublient, mais les écosystèmes marins aussi doivent être connectés. Quelle est cette connectivité? Quand on met en place un réseau d'aires protégées, est-ce que c'est à l'endroit approprié qu'on la désigne? C'est important. Et au-delà de ça, c'est la fonctionnalité et l'atteinte des objectifs assignés à ces zones-là, qu'elles soient aires protégées, autres mesures, corridors. C'est comment ils puissent jouer leur rôle en tant qu'écosystème pour rendre les services écosystémiques qui sont entendus d'eux, mais pour cela, il faudrait qu'ils soient vraiment bien réhabilités et fonctionnels. Il y a la question sur est-ce que les corridors peuvent lutter contre la déforestation? Oui, je dirais. Évidemment, je dirais, si les mesures ou l'approche est bien prise, si les études ont été bien faites, qu'est-ce qui est à l'origine de la déforestation? Est-ce que cette zone déforestée est une zone de corridor? Quelle est la faune qu'on avait? Et à partir de cette construction entre les acteurs qui tournent autour de ces écosystèmes-là, valablement, on peut trouver les actions à mener. Mais au-delà des actions à mener, il faut avoir les ressources financières pour les mettre, mais il faut aussi suivre la mise en œuvre pour pouvoir réellement améliorer ce processus-là sur le long terme. Merci.
Merci Adja. Effectivement, alors on a une personne dans le chat, Gary Table, qu'on connaît, qui insiste effectivement sur la nécessité de connaître son territoire avant d'intervenir. Gary, vous insistez aussi sur le fait que la connectivité, ça correspond à une vision nouvelle de la conservation, qu'il faut travailler, et vous nous dites qu'en connectant les gens, vous connectez la nature. C'est tout à fait vrai, et nous souscrivons à cela. Moi, je voudrais rebondir sur la question des financements, parce qu'effectivement, c'est revenu plusieurs fois dans le chat. Sur notre projet guinéen, dont je vous parlais en introduction, effectivement, nous allons travailler sur ce couple connectivité écologique, mécanisme de compensation. Et nous allons essayer de faire certifier des projets qui intègrent des co-bénéfices climat, biodiversité, connectivité écologique. C'est assez innovant, mais c'est une façon aussi de faire converger des financements vers ce sujet et de rendre, encore une fois, les populations locales actrices de ces politiques, de leur faire comprendre que en protégeant leur environnement, en protégeant la biodiversité qui les entoure, ça peut aussi leur donner des sources de revenus alternatives et pérennes. Voilà. Donc, c'est aussi sur cette question-là que nous allons travailler dans le cadre de notre projet démonstrateur guinéen. Je pense que nous sommes arrivés peu ou prou au terme de nos échanges. Je crois qu'il y a une photo, n'est-ce pas? Un screenshot, je crois. N'est-ce pas, Chloé? Je te recède la parole pour la suite et la fin.
Oui, on va faire la photo avant de conclure. Et pendant la conclusion, on vous repartagera les contacts des intervenants et les prochains rendez-vous. Donc, restez, on vous libérera avant 16h15. Est-ce qu'on est bon pour la photo?
Non. Souriez.
On vous préviendra. N'hésitez pas à allumer vos caméras. Voilà, il y a plein de caméras qui s'allument. On vous laisse encore une petite minute pour allumer vos caméras.
J'en profite pour rappeler à tout le monde de ne pas hésiter à contacter le Centre régional de collaboration pour plus d'informations, notamment sur le financement de vos projets.
Merci beaucoup, Yohann.
Merci. On part sur la photo. Ok.
Le temps que la photographe se mette en place.
Ça. Ok, bah à 3 alors. 1, 2 et 3. Ok, c'est bon. Du coup, bah, merci d'avoir mis toutes vos caméras. C'était chouette de pouvoir vous voir. Merci à Anne pour la modération. Merci aux intervenantes et aux intervenants pour nous avoir partagé toutes ces présentations et ces réflexions intéressantes. Et surtout, merci à toutes et à tous pour votre présence et pour votre très active participation dans le chat. On va vous partager une slide où vous pourrez vous revoir les contacts. Mais dans tous les cas, vous pouvez aussi nous contacter et on vous fera suivre si vous avez envie de poursuivre les discussions ou si vous avez encore des questions. On vous attend aussi nombreuses et nombreux pour nos prochains rendez-vous en ligne, en partenariat avec Afrique 21. Donc le prochain numéro de l'eMag, il aura lieu le 23 février à 14h GMT, 15h heure de Paris. Et on parlera d'accès aux énergies renouvelables pour les populations rurales. Les inscriptions sont déjà ouvertes. On va vous mettre un lien dans le chat. Et le mois suivant, on aura aussi un eMag qui nous permettra de continuer ces réflexions qu'on a amorcées aujourd'hui, parce qu'on parlera d'agroécologie et de résilience des systèmes alimentaires pendant l'eMag numéro 3 du 23 mars, encore à 14h GMT, 15h heure de Paris. Et sur le même thème aussi, on pourrait suivre les aventures de l'équipe de biodiversité de Climate Change qui sera présente au One Forest Summit. Donc voilà, merci encore à toutes et tous, merci aux intervenants, merci à Anne et à bientôt.
Au revoir tout le monde, merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
Vous recevrez l'eMag dans une semaine en version magazine.
Beaucoup. À bientôt.
Merci, au revoir.
Merci.
Merci, au revoir.
Au revoir.
À bientôt.
Merci.
Au revoir, merci.
Au revoir.
Merci, au revoir.
Merci beaucoup, au revoir.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Bravo.
Merci. Au revoir, Chloé. Merci.
Au revoir.